One thing I've always loved about Nintendo is their ability to think outside the box and create titles that don't fit their regular mold, which can either result in an extreme hit or unfortunate miss. Every time I do research for a video, I discover another entry that I didn't know about, and do find it very interesting to look at games that fall outside of their main series, leading me to create today's video about the best and worst spin-off entries in every Nintendo franchise. I'll try to pick a few from each series for both categories, as I don't think it's fair to exclude some interesting ones if they're worth talking about. Oh yeah, before I get started, my name is Copycat, and if you haven't yet, then please subscribe to my channel, and hit that bell button to stay notified when I upload new videos. With a vast library of over 200 games in Nintendo's Mario flagship franchise, it was pretty hard to pick just a few titles to talk about, as I could think of about a dozen that could fit in each category. However, on the best side, I already knew that I needed to talk about Super Mario Maker 1 and 2, as this really is the pinnacle of 2D Mario platforming, letting you create and share levels over the internet with others. These creations evolved over time to become more and more complex, where now you'll find some ingenious designs where I bet Nintendo never even imagined it would reach this level. The only other game I feel compelled to mention is Super Mario RPG, which really paved the way for the Paper Mario and Mario and Luigi series, being the character's first adventure in this type of genre, really opening Nintendo up to make more. On top of that, it's extremely underrated as it came out late in the Super Nintendo's history, so not many people picked it up. If you want to check it out, you could find it on the Switch's SNES online library, as it's definitely worth the play. Now, one worst spin-off game I immediately have to mention is Mario Pinball Land that came out for the Game Boy Advance in 2004, which quite honestly is a repetitive mess that I tried to enjoy as a kid but ended up hating. To put Mario's name on a generic, easy pinball game just seems like a cash grab when I look back on it, and honestly didn't have enough substance to be an amazing title. I will commend its graphics as it contains pretty complex gameplay for the time, really knocking it out of the park with the feeling that you're in a 3D realm, which is impressive as apparently it was only made by 5 people. The last game on the worst side I want to mention is the insultingly easy Paper Mario Sticker Star, which all ran on the mechanic of using stickers you find around the Mushroom Kingdom as your abilities in battle. These stickers were, however, way too overpowered and appeared way too often, which eliminated any risk in the game. I get that Nintendo wanted to incorporate the 3DS's touchscreen in some way, but a gimmick like that should never sacrifice the actual quality of the game. Up next in this video, we're going to look at the Legend of Zelda franchise that doesn't have many spin-off entries, but there is one that's somewhat overlooked and definitely think it deserves a more in-depth feature in the Cadence of Hyrule, Crypt of the Necrodancer. This Nintendo Switch entry combines the dungeon exploration from the Zelda series with rhythm-based mechanics from Crypt of the Necrodancer, leading to a very unique experience. Here you can only move and attack efficiently if you do it to the beat of the songs, which can be very tricky to get used to, as when the game progresses it becomes more fast-paced, so you actually need to know your enemies' patterns to properly survive. This is a perfect switch up from the usual gameplay we've grown to get used to, and adds another whole layer to a title that I didn't think would work when I first saw the trailer. The only game from the bad spin-off side I want to talk about is the Four Swords Adventures for the GameCube, only because it required you to use a Game Boy Advance system in conjunction with link cables as a controller if you wanted to play multiplayer. This turned what could have been a fun experience into one that my friends and I had to skip over due to it being too expensive to play together, which is a feature that always should be free in a video game. I get that Nintendo was trying something new and wanting each player to have their own unique screen. It's just too much to ask for them to have to pay more. Although the Metroid franchise only has 2 spin-off titles over its almost 35 years of existence, they do both fit perfectly in their respective categories, in one being very good and the other incredibly bad. On the good spin-off side, we're going to look at Metroid Prime Pinball for the DS, which in contrast to Mario Land Pinball, received stellar reviews upon its release, as it perfectly integrated the two genres into one. The graphics were seen as top-notch for the time, and the fact that the DS possesses two screens definitely helps the player greatly in seeing where the Samus ball is traveling. This entry came out towards the end of the video game pinball era, and I'm not sure there could ever be another entry that could match this one. On the flip side of things, I think it's pretty easy to say that Metroid Prime, Federation Force, is the worst spin-off game in the franchise. This isn't only due to the fact that the series' main protagonist, Samus Aran, is not found at all during this game, but also because it strips away the usual puzzle exploration mechanic just to focus on first-person shooting. Fans who had been waiting ages for any sort of new Metroid title were left utterly disappointed by the end result of Federation Force, resulting in abysmal sales across the board. I get that Nintendo probably just wanted to attach the Metroid name to this game to increase sales, but people did not fall for that poor marketing practice, and it seems that Nintendo has learned their lesson in recent years. Next, we're going to look at the Donkey Kong franchise of games that, believe it or not, spawned several unique spin-off titles, some of which are out of this world fun, and some that are an absolute snooze fest. Without a doubt, I need to talk about Diddy Kong Racing, which oddly doesn't star Donkey Kong, on the best spin-off side of things, as it surprised me a lot when I played it as a kid, due to it being a pretty in-depth adventure title, and not just your run-of-the-mill kart-style game. The story mode is really what sets it apart from everything else, as it perfectly combines the usual racing aspects of games that we've grown to love, with adventure titles like Super Mario 64, where you need to unlock certain doors to progress through the world. On top of that, it's also jam-packed full of secrets and fun Easter eggs that keeps you playing for hours and hours. One on the terrible spin-off side that I need to mention, only because its creation makes no sense, is Donkey Kong Jr. Math. They came out for the NES in 1986. Back during the company's earlier days in the video game industry, they were very open to the idea of creating edutainment-based titles that unfortunately had little to do with the franchise where they appeared. In this case, all you do is try to solve math equations and putting numbers in the blank spaces on the screen. Doing multiplication and long division, not on a piece of paper, is actually a pain in the butt, especially as I'm already terrible with math as it is. As you could guess, this game did not sell well, meaning that copies today are extremely rare, and it could fetch a pretty hefty price if you want to buy it on the open market. The Fire Emblem franchise is the next one we're going to look at, which has a very interesting spin-off title called Tokyo Mirage Sessions FE, which combines it with the popular JRPG series Shin Megami Tensei. This very strange combination of worlds brings Fire Emblem characters into modern-day Tokyo, as they merge with humans from a talent agency to fight evil entities. Even though the premise is a bit odd, the intense focus on story, the fun stylistic combat, and its anime-like feel definitely are responsible for its great reviews. And even though games like this aren't always for me, I can still acknowledge when they're well made. The only spin-off I want to look at on the bad side is the mobile Fire Emblem Heroes entry, only because it pushes you to spend real money through gacha mechanics, which unfortunately in video games is almost always a disingenuous method. There is also basically no story to be found, instead focusing on the series' combat mechanics, giving you maps to complete by defeating enemies. I get the draw of creating mobile games as they will reach a much wider audience. It's just that if you really want to experience what the franchise is about, then you have to play a console version. When it comes to the Star Fox franchise, there is one spin-off title that I instantly have to talk about in Star Fox Adventures, which may be a bit divisive with it showing up on the best side, as its gameplay really isn't for everyone. That's because its origins come from a game that was being developed called Dinosaur Planet, where very late into its development, Nintendo decided it would work well if Fox McCloud and friends were added as characters, which is why this is a very grounded entry, focusing more on exploration and puzzle solving rather than the traditional ship-based shoot-'em-up. Even though this isn't necessarily what fans wanted, the playthrough was still interesting and could be tons of fun, and I'll always remember loving how different this game felt. Now, on the worst spin-off side, that distinction has to go to the weird Star Fox Guard Tower Defense entry. That was shipped alongside Star Fox Zero for the Wii U as a bit of a bonus for players. This, however, feels like a completely unnecessary addition, as it's not the type of game that can keep you entertained for hours on end, and most people, including myself, just skipped over playing it altogether. I think this tower defense could have been better suited on a mobile device, as releasing it with a failed game on a failed system already hampered its prospect of being popular. One franchise that has really mastered the genre of the spin-off game is Kirby's, who's shown up in many different forms over the years, including the game we're going to talk about first, where he turns into a golf ball. This is the spectacular Kirby's Dream Course for the SNES, where you need to knock the pink blob into enemies, where destroying each one will eventually reveal the goal hole. This core gameplay mechanic was incredibly unique for the time, as golf games up to that point were pretty basic and rudimentary, where this entry added a level of complexity that had never been seen before. Another entry that's worth a mention on the good side of things is Kirby's Air Ride for the GameCube, which is a very cool racing game that's set in mid-air courses rather than the usual grounded tracks. Although receiving mixed reviews from critics at the time, this game has become a cult classic among fans, as it is truly a fun game and an amazing alternative to Mario Kart. The only game from the bad spin-off side I want to look at is one called Kirby's Block Ball, which I talked about in a recent video as the worst selling game from this franchise. This entry is quite literally a Brick Breaker clone that doesn't add anything of value at all, and the game's length is so short that you'll finish it in no time. Even though it received positive reviews when it was initially released, in retrospect, pretty much everyone agrees that it was a rather bland experience that is worth being skipped over entirely. To be honest, I had a lot of trouble deciding what's a spin-off game and what isn't in the Wario franchise, as it constantly changed game types starting in the platforming genre, and over time evolved into minigame-oriented titles. In terms of best spin-offs, I guess I'd have to go with the Japanese-only release of Mario and Wario, mainly due to its gameplay being so different than most Nintendo entries. That's because it uses a computer mouse instead of the usual controller, as you need to click intangible blocks to make them solid so that blind Mario can platform towards the goal and defeat the evil Wario. Even though it was advertised and slated for North American release, that never came to fruition as Nintendo was scared that people wouldn't want to pay extra for the mouse that only worked on the SNES. And this honestly is a shame, as I would have loved to play this entry as a kid. In the worst spin-off section of this video is one of the character's earliest experiences in Wario's Woods, which is a puzzler that also sees Wario as the main antagonist, released on the NES and SNES in 1995. What makes this title different from games like Tetris or Puzzle League is that you don't control or manipulate the blocks as they land, instead controlling Toad, who moves the various colored monsters and bombs, rearranging them so that 3 of the same are matching. Oddly, this game was met with positive reviews at the time, but I guess it does show how people's taste and what they want has changed over time, as nowadays this would be seen as extremely boring. Up next in this video, we're going to look at the kid-friendly Yoshi franchise, where one of the best spin-off titles is actually a good example of a fun puzzler that withstands the test of time in Yoshi's Cookie. They came out for the NES, SNES, and Game Boy in 1993. This fast-paced puzzle entry sees you having to create an entire lane of the same tile to clear it off the screen, which is a much more satisfying mechanic than what's found in most other puzzle games we've seen so far in this video. On top of that, the SNES version adds a mode where you have to solve pretty complex puzzles that kept me entertained for hours when I was young. It's funny because on the worst side is another puzzle game, this time just called Yoshi, where you control Mario, who switches between 4 platforms that are holding enemies. The only way to clear these enemies is either by matching 2 of the same kind, or by connecting the Yoshi eggs together, which clears everything at once. From playing this game, I can definitely say that it got old super quick, and I guess that's what led to the much more in-depth Cookie entry. The next franchise we're going to look at is the master of releasing spin-off titles in Pokemon, where there were over 122 games that range from amazing to some of the worst garbage you've ever played. I guess I do have to mention Pokemon Go, where it's been almost 6 years since its release, and it's still one of the most popular mobile games in the world. I think its focus on having to go outside and walk around to capture Pokemon, and work together with other people to get the extremely rare ones is its main draw. Of course, there are some microtransactions, but you aren't required to buy them to really complete the game, which is why so many different types of people, including ones who weren't even really Pokemon fans, played this game. My personal favorite spin-off in the series is by far the original Pokemon Snap for the N64, as I loved how it puts you right into these creatures' worlds, and the mechanic of taking pictures worked too well with what was going on. I also loved that there were tons of secrets to find along your adventure, where some Pokemon were so hidden that I didn't find out where they were until years later using the internet. Of course, the new Pokemon Snap just released this year on the Nintendo Switch, but to be honest, there's no beating the original title. Just because of its horrific microtransactions, I have to talk about the mobile Pokemon Masters EX game, as it's almost impossible to play this without paying real cash. That's because there's 3 types of currency in this game, which if you haven't guessed, means it's structured so you need the paid for currency if you even want to unlock and see certain trainers with their Pokemon pairs. Now, this game does have a pretty dedicated fan base and did receive pretty positive reviews. I just personally dislike mobile Nintendo entries, as even though they're free to play, they're always focused on pay-to-win mechanics. The only other game I want to mention from the bad side is Pokemon Quest, that was released both on the Nintendo Switch and iOS devices in 2018. In this strange one, you control a group of Pokemon, sending them into a real-time strategy-style top-down battle, where they work together to defeat the enemy Pokemon in each area. Combat is not the main draw of this game, and instead, it's all about setting up your team in the right way for maximum damage. This type of gameplay is not really for everyone, and to be honest, sometimes I wonder how so many strange games come out with a Pokemon name attached to them. We could be here all day talking about several awful entries we've gone over in past videos already, but I at least consider these 2 to be the absolute worst. The final franchise's spin-offs we're gonna look at is Animal Crossings, where I guess I'd have to go with Happy Home Designer for the 3DS as the best game, where you get to customize homes for your favorite characters from across the series. Although not really for me, I do get why this type of game is popular with some people, as the design aspect can be satisfying, even if there is no real story. Now, if you haven't guessed, the worst Animal Crossing spin-off is quite obviously Amiibo Festival, which is pretty much a Mario Party board game, oddly devoid of minigames. On top of this strange exclusion, there are only certain characters that can be unlocked through buying and scanning Amiibos, which is a bit of an insult, especially as the base game is not free. In my opinion, this is by far the worst game in this video, as there's not really any substance to it at all, other than Nintendo wanting you to pay money for Amiibos. Alright, that's gonna be it for today's video, guys. I really hope you did enjoy this one. If you did, please leave a like, comment below what you thought about it, and of course subscribe to my channel. Also, I do have an Instagram at Copycat Gamer, so go give that a follow. There I upload some cool clips and items from my collection that you won't see anywhere else. Hope you guys all have a good day, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!